You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. Large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa. A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
Just so we can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that snow's
The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Massachusetts.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
Good Thursday evening. Thank you for joining us here on the Weather Junkies. It's July 14th, so we're halfway through July, and that means we're halfway through meteorological summer. I apologize, but we are live here on Thursday evening. Some of you may have listened to our collaboration with the Carolina Weather Group last night, so it's been a busy few nights. But anyways, I'm Tyler Jankowski, as always, joining the show from Connecticut alongside Dakota Smith in Colorado.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm out here in Meade, Colorado, and it is fire season out here. Over the weekend we had a few pretty bad fires. There was the Hayden Pass fire down near Colorado Springs, and then we had a fire over near Nederland titled the Cold Springs Fire. And generally, they're contained at this point. I don't think it's 100% because that takes a while. And so, yeah, it's hot, dry, not as windy as it has been over the weekend. That's what spurred the spread of some of those fires. But otherwise, it's actually been pretty nice from a comfort standpoint, except for every now and then you'll see some smoke in the sky and it'll smell a little smoky. How's the weather in Connecticut?
It is soupy outside. I wish I could show you a picture of our windows because we have the central AC on, but the windows are all fogged over. We had some showers come through. We were supposed to have severe weather, but like clockwork this year, we did not have any severe weather in Connecticut, not even anything close to severe weather. So a big letdown for anyone that was looking for big storms here in Connecticut. I just tweeted that we haven't had any widespread severe weather since February 24th, 2016, which is so odd that it was in February. And we discussed that on the show, but it's been since then. And in addition to that, we haven't even had a tornado warning at all this year. We didn't even have one last year. So it's been a long time since we even had a tornado warning here in Connecticut. We average a couple tornado warnings this summer. Maybe like one tornado a summer. We haven't had anything like that, so it's been very quiet.
Well, that's a good thing, right? Pretty easy day at work, I guess.
Well, I was in the morning, so I was preparing for the potential severe weather.
Oh, I gotcha. Well, that's good. So tonight we have on a meteorologist from the National Hurricane Center, Eric Blake. He got his bachelor's in atmospheric science at the University of Louisiana at Monroe. Then he got his master's in atmospheric science at Colorado State, and now he's a hurricane specialist at the National Hurricane Center. Eric, thanks so much for joining us tonight. How's the weather in Florida?
Well, it's warm, humid, and just some distant high clouds.
So is that pretty much the normal this time of the year?
Yeah, it's been a little drier and warmer than normal. We've only had 1 or 2 inches of rain so far this month, but we should be a little closer, be closer to 3 or 4. So it's been a warm July is never what you want to hear if you're in Florida.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we'll get back to Eric in a moment. We'll go through the tweets, and Eric, feel free to chime in if you have any thoughts on the following tweets. We'll start with our first tweet of the night from Harold Brooks. You can follow him at HEBrooks87, and he tweeted out, "Current severe thunderstorm watch looks like this. Storm Prediction Center blue, weather.gov, MAUV, and National Severe Storm that from the Twitter that they tweet out yellow." And this kind of brings up a topic that we talked about last night on the Carolina Weather Group. And that's consistency in colors, and I've been a little too vocal about this just because, I don't know, I've been spewing my opinion, but I think right now they're in kind of a transition period to get everything on a consistent level across the Twitter and across weather.gov. Tyler, I know we talked about this last night. Any other comments on this?
Yeah, I think it's embarrassing that the same organization has so many different colors for the same thing. But if that's true, as you say, it's going to something new. I wonder if it's foreshadowing a change across the board to a different color.
Yeah, I'll be curious. What I know HasSimp has been kind of in the works and for a long time now. And I had a Twitter conversation with um, Derek. I don't remember his last name, but his Twitter bio said he was like the social media person for the National Weather Service. And I asked him, is this something that the all red warnings, is this something that will um, cross over to the weather.gov and then everything will be the same? And he said yeah, he thinks that's what's going to happen in the future here. I think that's a good thing, but I guess it'll just take some time. His name's Derek DeRoche, by the way. He's the Emerging Tech and Social Media Manager for the National Weather Service. So I'm assuming if someone is going to know about it, he'll know about that. So hopefully we see the transition into the future here. So we'll move on to the next tweet here. And this is kind of a little plug here for Scott Piley. I think it's Piley. I'm not sure. You can follow him at ScottPiley_WX. And his tweet is Weather 101, Episode 1, The Heat Index. And it's a tweet with his video. And I just think this is cool because it seems like he's kind of started a mini video series to teach people about different weather terms and different meteorological terms. So I think it's a cool thing he's doing over there.
Yeah, it seems like a neat little add-on to the typical stuff that you do as a weather communicator. Is it similar to the additional clips you're doing, Dakota? Is that why it sparked your interest?
No, it's not actually. I would love to do something like that, but it's not right now. It's not close to something I do, but I would like to do that at some point if I had more time, you know. So we'll move on to our final tweet here. We blasted through this quick. This tweet comes from Zach Sharp at Storm Chaser Zach, and it says, "Check this out: overnight lightning strike at the Des Moines Golf and Country Club." And it's a really cool picture of the hole with the little metal thing in the middle, and you can see how the lightning moved through the soil, and it left a kind of a scar on the green, which is just totally awesome. So if you get a chance, check out that tweet. It'll be in our YouTube description. Pretty cool, huh, Tyler?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it further emphasizes why everyone should respect lightning. It seems like that one happened at night, but at least there was evidence of what happened. And when you look at that, you're like, oh my gosh, it's a good thing I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And we have another tweet on the same topic of lightning. We actually had two people that got hit by lightning here in Connecticut last week, I believe. They were walking near a beach, and initially it wasn't very clear what happened because the people didn't remember, but then security camera footage came out, and it made very clear that they fell down before the tree fell down. So indeed, they were actually indirectly struck by the lightning. You know, it wasn't a direct strike, they'd be dead, but it wasn't actually the tree limb that hit them. But no one knew that until the security footage was released. So this was tweeted out by a local news reporter, and when you play the video, it's very scary. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anything like it. But
Wow.
The two people just dropped to the ground, and then there's another clip somewhere else where they're interviewed, and they don't even know what happened. You see that, Dakota?
Yeah, that's a crazy clip there. Is it day out? It looks like it's like pretty light out.
Yeah, it was day.
Yeah, that's scary. It's not what you imagine when if something like that's going to happen, it's going to be very dark and stormy. But yeah, they must have just been under some sort of
And you know what?
anvil or
If you look at the
something.
ground, it doesn't even look like it was raining. So that is another example of what we preach day in and day out.
Yeah, that's gonna cause some nightmares for me. I'm terrified of lightning, so that just reaffirms my fear. So we'll move on to the main topic tonight, and that is chatting with Eric Blake of the National Hurricane Center. Eric, I wanted to start kind of off of the bat to get an idea of what you do day to day at the National Hurricane Center.
Well, day to day, especially this time of year, I write the tropical weather outlook. We do the media range products with the Weather Prediction Center, and then we do any active tropical cyclones in the Eastern Pacific and the Atlantic Basin. That's really day to day for me.
And so, on a kind of a longer scale time period, what are your duties and roles at the National Hurricane Center?
Well, it's kind of there's really two seasons of being a hurricane specialist. We're in the midst of hurricane season, so it's very operationally oriented. But in the off season, it's preparing all the tropical cyclone reports, and then it's talking with emergency managers, training for the next season, and going to conferences and spreading the National Hurricane Center message out, as well as doing some science on the side.
Gotcha. And kind of more of a background basis, what sparked your interest in the atmospheric sciences and weather?
I've loved weather since I could remember. I think the thing that probably cemented it was the 1985 hurricane season. I'm originally from southeastern Louisiana, and I can vividly remember driving across the Lake Pontchartrain Causeway. Somehow it wasn't shut during Hurricane Juan late in the year, and the waves crashing over, and I was really hooked on weather after that point. It was just storm after storm affected Louisiana that year. And I can remember tracking storms in junior high and high school. Man, some people are going after girls. I was going after hurricanes. So that's how it goes.
Yeah, that seems to be kind of the case for a lot of people in weather, that just kind of from the beginning something sparked their interest, and they never knew a time when they weren't interested in weather. I think Tyler has a question here. Want to go ahead, Tyler?
Yes, we've been taking a look at your bio from the Hurricane Center, and it says that during your graduate studies you worked with the renowned Dr. William Guay. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
It was great to work with Bill. I mean, he was, a lot of people say people are characters, but Bill was a character. He was a great person to work for. He fought very hard for his grad students. He had a pretty larger-than-life reputation, but he was incredibly down to earth. He was a great person to work for. He taught me a lot about tropical meteorology, and I feel really fortunate to have studied under him. I mean, he was really, really part of the reason why I even got the job at the Hurricane Center, because of a good recommendation to Max Mayfield. As a result of that, I think that played a large role in me getting the SCEP program, the pre-intern program at the Weather Service back, 16 years ago now. And that really set me on my way. I owe a lot to Bill.
I can attest to some of that, because I'm at Colorado State as well. I've only been here for 2 years now, and he's a character, and he's kind of a larger-than-life kind of aura when he walks into like a seminar or something. And he had some of the best questions that he asked certain people. Sometimes they had no idea what to do.
Yeah, I'll deeply miss Bill. It was quite a loss, but he had a very nice memorial I was at in Colorado a couple months ago. He was a great guy.
So let's shift gears here, and right off the bat, I'm curious. So, do you have much input on the seasonal Atlantic hurricane forecast and the Pacific forecast?
I'm part of the seasonal hurricane forecast team. I work with several people at the Hurricane Center, and we work with NOAA HRD, and then the NOAA Climate Prediction Center is the main office that issues the forecast. Jerry Bell and Jay Shem up there, and they really lead the charge, and we provide input on the basis of a variety of climate factors, including SSTs in the Atlantic, El Nino, La Nina, large-scale patterns, vertical wind shear, sea level pressure. We analyze all those patterns and look at some of the GCM models to see what the atmosphere is forecast to look like, and try to piece all that together and come up with a consensus forecast.
So the forecast that you all put out this year was 10 to 16 named storms and 4 to 8 hurricanes and 1 to 4 major hurricanes. I just kind of, as briefly as you can, I know we don't want to get too into it, but what was kind of the reasoning behind this forecast?
Well, that forecast was issued, in a sense, there's a lot of conflicting signals. On one hand, you had a lot of models that were going toward La Nina, which is generally fairly favorable for the Atlantic Basin. However, the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation isn't as positive as it used to be, and depending on exactly what index you look at, could have even turned negative. So you kind of have those competing factors, and if you looked at some of the GCM forecasts, some were calling for a below average season, some were calling for an above average year, and it seems like there's just a lot more uncertainty in terms of the type of year we could be having. Part of the complication is, if you're looking for, one of the techniques we look at is analogs, looking at analogs for the past to see what's most like the current conditions, what we expect. There's a lot of things that are happening this year we haven't seen a lot of. I mean, first of all, the global sea surface temperatures are quite warm, and even though the Atlantic is slightly warm now, the globe is so warm as a whole, so it really isn't as warm as you think. The difference from the tropical SST mean is an important predictor in a seasonal forecast. So there were a lot of competing factors, and I think that led to the near normal forecast with a pretty large range.
Gotcha. Thanks.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I have a question regarding Hurricane Joaquin. It seemed for the longest time that either the storm was going to impact the East Coast well south of Connecticut or go cleanly out to sea, but at one point the track had a direct hit in Connecticut, and it seemed like that was the average track, even though no individual model was forecasting that. Can you enlighten us and let us know how that came to be, and what were some of the thoughts in that forecast?
I don't specifically remember the exact forecast, but I do remember working summer Joaquin, and Joaquin was a very difficult situation because the bulk of the guidance had a United States impact for early on, and the European model was kind of held out to sea for most of the time after the first or second day, and the ensemble guidance did have that split into it, and part of the reason for going with a consensus is to minimize the error. It might be a lower probability solution in the mean, but then again, we're not 100. If you look at many ensemble simulations, we're not 100% sure those bifurcations are real. They're starting to get to be better and better, but there's still a lot of uncertainty on how useful are they. So I think that's how we ended up with that kind of in the middle track. It's hard to just go straight with the European and let everyone off the hook, but then if you go on the left side of the guidance with most of the guidance, then you that may not necessarily be the best place to be either. In real time, it was a very difficult forecast.
Yeah, no doubt it was tough. I remember waking up one morning and all of a sudden the track was over Connecticut, and it was interesting to see who bit that and who did not. But yeah, I mean it's interesting because we haven't had a whole lot of activity. Obviously, we had Sandy and we had Irene, but Joaquin was a bit of a unique storm in the challenges that it threw to us, at least here in the Northeast. But interesting to hear that from someone that worked a little bit on the storm at least.
Yeah, it was really challenging to kind of piece together exactly why this model was doing this solution and what the uncertainties were, and even in post analysis, I think there's still some debate on whether it was because the storm was stronger than we expected or the ridge was stronger than we expected. How did the role of the northeasterly shear play into it? There are a lot of things we don't know exactly about Joaquin. Joaquin was one of the larger errors that we'd seen in quite some time. It's just a good reminder to show that there is uncertainty and can be some large errors at times in these forecasts.
So kind of on a similar note here, we're talking about track of one storm, and I'm curious. I saw that you at the National Hurricane Center are making the cones smaller, accepted 120 hours. So what's kind of the mindset behind that and that change?
Well, the cone is merely right now. It's just a 5-year average, 5-year average of our errors. Basically at the 66th percentile. So if the errors keep dropping and dropping, then the cone keeps getting smaller and smaller. We're in the process of hopefully shifting the cone to being a little more situationally dependent upon the spread of the models and other predictors. Hopefully we'll get that type of dynamic cone online. But there's a lot of other projects that are ongoing, and so prioritizing those with watches and warnings before tropical cyclone formation and storm surge watches and warnings and other things we're working on. It's a complicated process because to a large extent the spread of the model guidance is a decent predictor of the uncertainty, but understanding how that fails is really important for us from a scientific perspective.
So I guess did you guys change the cone every year and based on the last 5 years before that?
That's right. It changes every year on the 5-year average. Sometimes it shrinks because so in 2010 was the year that was dropped. 2010 had a lot of low latitude systems that are usually a little more predictable than the types of storms you had in 2015. 2015 we had very large errors, so you kind of took out the low errors in 2010 and added in the 2015 errors, which included I think a quarter of the sample out at long range was Joaquin. So it's not hard to imagine why the cone got a little bit bigger, but it's very small. You couldn't even see it on the eye if you put it last year's versus this year's.
Gotcha. And so some other things that you guys have implemented. So since 2015, you've been issuing the storm surge maps, and now you have a watch warning prototype. And so the storm surge, the actual surge flooding map, that's becoming operational, I believe, and then the warnings and watches are prototype right now. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit and why you guys are implementing those products?
Well, we think that the graphic, the storm surge map is a very useful tool for people. I think it's a really useful tool, and it's a very visually appealing tool on a reasonable worst case scenario that's useful for preparation purposes. And I think the storm surge watch or warning, the prototype, that's good for us to test this year and try to make sure that the system works in preparation for it, hopefully going live next year. Storm surge is a huge killer when it comes to tropical cyclones, and having a warning for that specific type of phenomena, we think will save lives.
Yeah, that's awesome. And kind of like retrospect, I'm thinking, it's curious that we hadn't had something like that before, and it's a great implementation because it just seems something that is going to do a lot of good.
I think people have ignored, not ignored, ignored isn't a fair term. I think people focus too much on the wind speed, and they forget that
Right.
water, in some storms will kill 75% of the people that die, and it's kind of an overlooked hazard at times, and we definitely want to make sure that's not an overlooked hazard.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's similar to severe storms sometimes when there's a lot of focus on the winds, and then every now and then you'll get a storm that'll train or set up in the same spot, and the flooding is really the both on a property and life standpoint some of the most devastating part of it. So I just to switch gears here, I've heard a lot of conversations in the weather community about not having a landfalling hurricane and how there's been so much change since the last storm, and I haven't really formed my opinion because I'm not really familiar with the Gulf Coast that much, and I don't know what that's like. Do you think when we have the next landfall, and let's say it's just a hurricane, not a major hurricane, like a one or two, that makes landfall, and it's in a do you think there'll be a difference between the last time a hurricane made landfall from now, and what would that difference be if there is one?
Difference in terms of what are you focusing on?
Sorry, just perception and kind of public preparedness and emergency management preparedness.
Well, I'm not as worried about the emergency management community, but I think in general the public, there's been a complacency. It's been a long time since a lot of people have had to put shutters up, and I think people aren't quite taking it as seriously as they should be. And your point to only Category 1 or 2. I mean, you have to remember Hurricane Ike was a Category 2 hurricane in terms of, and which is a wind, but the water was a serious hazard. And you're talking about one of the top 5 most costly storms in U.S. history. So I hope that people are prepared. People should definitely take it more seriously. I mean, all indications are that we're going to have a more active year than we've seen the last 3. But we'll have to wait and see. I mean, regardless of what a seasonal forecast is, you really have to prepare every year. You can go back to the classic example of Hurricane Andrew. There was only one major hurricane that year in the Atlantic Basin. It was a quiet year other than that, but it went right over South Florida, a Category 5 hurricane. It's too important. You have too much to lose by not preparing, by rolling the dice and just seeing what happens.
Yeah, so you mentioned Ike and the category it was, but all the water that it brought. How do you, I guess, put the importance on flooding surge? I mean, I guess that's the purpose of the new product. But when it's just a Cat 1 or 2, people, don't have that urgency. What kind of, I don't know, what do you guys do anything different? Do you make in your discussion? Do you put big words there and try to catch people's attention?
Well, I think that the surge products are going to really help in terms of preparing people for a reasonable worst-case scenario and the warnings for next year. We're trying to steer people away from the wind to whatever the hazard is of the particular storm. Last year we started doing some key points in some of the high impact storms in the tropical cyclone discussion and also on Twitter, and they were very well received. And we're hoping that by emphasizing certain messages and by de-emphasizing the Saffir-Simpson category, that will yield good results.
Go ahead, Tyler. I think you had the next question here.
Yeah, you were the lead author on the Hurricane Sandy storm report. I'm curious, with such a large and important review, what was the most important thing you learned from that? What was the biggest challenge in that report?
The whole thing. It was if you looked at that report, it was 86 pages or something ridiculous like that. It affected such a large area. It was difficult, first of all, figuring out exactly what it was. It did not neatly. I mean, it neatly fit into the major hurricane box in the Caribbean, and then when it got north of the Caribbean, it really changed a lot. It took on some characteristics that you don't often see in a tropical cyclone. I'd either go to say it took on some subtropical characteristics for a time, but then it re-intensified. It had another, an eye-like feature, and the pressure dropped extremely low. And then exactly figuring out when it became extratropical, when the front started wrapping into the center. Those are all very difficult assessments, and then you had all the you had tropical storm force winds from Florida to Maine, just about. It has such a ridiculous size to it, and the rainfall, and then you had snowfall. I had to put snowfall in it. I've never had to do that in my life. I don't think I'll ever have to do that again for a tropical cyclone report because of the heavy snowfall. And then you had someone die in West Virginia from snow, and figuring out which part of these storms effects are direct and indirect, and then reading about what happened to all the tragic way these people lost their lives. It was a very difficult report to write, meteorologically, emotionally, reading the stories and putting it all together. I had a lot of great help with that from a lot of the co-authors at the Hurricane Center. It was truly a team effort to get that report out.
I have another question regarding the length of time since the last major storm has hit the U.S., and I know we sort of touched on it, but I think one of the things we have in our mind, being from the Northeast, is that during a snowstorm there's a lot of misinformation that goes around on social media. Do you have any sense for the potential for misinformation as a hurricane is ready to hit? I mean, because we really haven't had an instance where social media was dominant leading up to one of these storms, I don't believe. I mean, Sandy was so-so, but certainly nothing in the Gulf.
Yeah, we've certainly increased our social media efforts at the Hurricane Center. You may or may not have seen some of the tweets. We'll put out information about sometimes whether we're starting or not starting a storm, and I talk about the various hazards. There is definitely some potential. There's great potential for misinformation on social media in just about any topic. That's not very hard to figure out if you use Twitter for 5 minutes. So what I've tried to spearhead is to bring us more into the Twitter era, and put our message out there to try to be the trusted voice in the storm situation, and focus on the hazards and the forecast, and put information out there that is dependable, that people can rely on.
You serve on the Tropical Cyclone Best Track Change Committee, and that means you consider proposals to change the hurricane record, which is important for long-term studies of climate. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what you do in that department?
Chris Lancy and a bunch of students at the Hurricane Center have been going back and looking at old storm data and trying to modernize the storm data set, and putting all the old information. The way that we estimated storm intensity was not particularly uniform through the ages, and now we're finding in the 40s and 50s a lot of the storm intensities are inflated because of bad visual estimates and unrealistic wind pressure relationships. So we're going back and changing the record where the latest science and observations support it. It's very important to get an accurate climate record, and it's a slow, very tedious process. We finish 5 or so years per year to go back and look through all the data per storm that is submitted to the Best Track Change Committee. But it's an important thing that we do. I think it's a valuable contribution to the scientific community.
Yeah, absolutely.
So on that note, how much research do you get to do while you're there? Do you get to do any, or because I know in some positions you can do some research when it's kind of a lull in your season?
I mostly will work in a collaborative sense on a very operationally based project. The last project that I did at the AMS was related to NHC, changing NHC forecast intensity skill. One project that I've enjoyed recently, scientifically, was looking at the impact of a convectively coupled Kelvin wave on tropical cyclogenesis in the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific. I think, over the past 10 years or so, the importance of these tropical equatorial waves, it was underestimated by me and I think a lot of people. And now that the data becomes better and better, we're really able to see some of the mechanics of tropical formation well before, and taking those into account, the Madden-Julian oscillation, the Kelvin waves, other large-scale things. I think I think that's part of the reason we're now able to issue skillful 5-day genesis forecasts. So that's the science that I'm interested in right now.
Gotcha. And I wanted to say something on the social media point that we talked about a bit earlier. I noticed that you guys have, I think it's 6 Twitter handles, one for the National Hurricane Center, one for the Atlantic, the Pacific, and then there's a storm surge handle, and then a analysis and forecast branch handle, and then Dr. Rick Knabb has a handle as well. That's awesome. First of all. And then you guys have a podcast that you'll be doing when, I'm assuming, when there's kind of a busy time and there's a storm brewing. I'm really looking forward to that because I think that'll really help with some of the media coverage on the storm. They'll get to hear it because podcasts are all the rage nowadays. So that'll be great for the media, I think, in the future.
Yeah, I'm very. We're definitely spending more time on the social media aspect because I think we've seen how the way that people get their news is changing, and it's important for us to change with the times.
So I kind of had a question about some of the products that you'll be working on in the future and implementing. Is there anything in the works that you can talk about that we might see in the near future?
Well, I touched on a couple of those. The watches and warnings before tropical cyclone form. I think that's something that'll be useful. It'll help us move away from the types of situation where, right now we don't have the ability to put up a tropical storm or hurricane watch before there's an actual tropical cyclone. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to, that we're putting in the right mechanics and background to put this watch and warning out. We'll put like a advisory package out. Been coming up with specific names for it. I can't remember now off the top of my head what we set it on. But it'll mostly be in the form of a very the same advisory style that we do now. So hopefully it'll be very easy for people to transition to, and in that product it'll basically be like a forecast for a tropical cyclone. It'll just be for a possible tropical cyclone, and basically one that we expect to become a tropical cyclone and affect land. that's one project that I think is coming hopefully next year. The storm surge warning. I'm not a part as closely tied to that one, but we're still on track for that one. It's a it's a little ironic when we've kind of had a deficit of these storms making landfall, and in one hand it's great that you don't want any storms making any impact, but you do kind of need to test things out and see how things will work in a real-time mode. It's kind of a funny, it's certainly a funny predicament to be in. I've talked about the upcoming, hopefully the dynamic cone, the cone changing upon situations, not just a 5-year average error. That's something that we've been looking into. I think we're also working on a time of arrival of wind, tropical storm force winds. I haven't heard exactly when that product is going to be out, but we're hoping that'll be something useful for people to get a handle on exactly when the strong winds might begin in their area.
Gotcha.
So you've been with the Hurricane Center, including your intern days, I should say, for 16 years, and this year I believe marks 10 years as a hurricane specialist. So one question that we ask everyone that comes on the show is, what is your advice to an up-and-coming meteorologist, someone that may be considering going into meteorology, or someone that may already be studying meteorology at a university here in the United States? What would be your best advice to them?
Well, if I had to do all over again, the computer science aspect is so critical, and knowing how to program fluently in a high-level language is extremely helpful in the job. And a lot of times, that's the type of skill that can separate you from other meteorologists. I mean, the Weather Service has been migrating slowly but surely toward more and more advanced degrees, and people with very very tuned into skill sets, high-level skill sets. And so for people in undergrad, that's really it's really important. And the other thing is, from a meteorological forecast perspective, it's important to practice the trade. You need to learn how to fail, because it will happen in meteorology. And fail and be humble about it, and I think all those things will really serve you well.
Great words, Eric. I especially love "you need to learn how to fail," because that's a tough hump to get over the first time. There's a kind of a big failure, especially from a research standpoint.
It happens all the time. I mean, I just make a forecast, and I mean, your forecast that you issue. I mean, I the other night working midnight shifts for a storm, there'll be part of that forecast that's wrong, and it could be really wrong. And trying to understand what went wrong, but you also kind of have to have a short memory, because you don't want to just dwell on the previous forecast. You just have to keep on. You still have another forecast to put out. So it's important to learn from your mistakes, but don't remember your mistakes for too long.
Yeah, I like that. Well put. So thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate taking some time out of your busy schedule. And best of luck this season, and with everything you guys have going on there. Seems like there's a lot going on. So thanks again for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
And if you want to follow us on Twitter, we're at the WX Junkies. We're also on Facebook. You can listen to this podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. If you're on iTunes, go ahead and give it a rating, a review. And Tyler, take it away. Who can we expect next week?
Next week, of course, will be on Thursday evening at our normally scheduled time, 8 o'clock, with Zach Labe. He is a follower of us on Twitter, and we're excited to have him on the show as we head into next week, as we get into late July. And we'll be talking with him Thursday evening. We'll have the show live, but then you can stream it whenever you're able to sit down and listen. So that does it for this night. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you'll join us right back here next week.